Hello everyone, welcome to Middle East Today with Neil Drow. I'm your host Neil Drow and it's Wednesday, January the 15th, 2025. Today we'll be diving into some critical developments shaping the Middle East. From the ongoing challenges in Gaza and the question of humanitarian zones, to the political shifts in Lebanon following the election of a new president, and the controversial perspective on Zionism shared by Israeli historian Ilan Pappé. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Firstly, the contradictory nature of Israel's humanitarian zone in Gaza, casting doubt on its effectiveness in providing safety for civilians amidst ongoing military strikes, has been highlighted by the BBC News. The zone, which Israel's military initially designated for the protection of civilians, has instead become a site of intensive conflict, with nearly 100 strikes since May 2024. Despite claims by the Israeli Defense Forces that they are targeting Hamas militants, the area remains densely populated and the strikes have resulted in significant civilian casualties, with reports of over 550 deaths from 97 attacks within the so-called zone. In the Middle Eastern context, this situation underscores a long-standing challenge in conflict zones where humanitarian concerns are often overshadowed by military objectives. The concept of safe zones have been repeatedly questioned, particularly in the Gaza Strip, where previous instances have shown that such areas often do not provide the intended protection. The United Nations and humanitarian organizations, including the Norwegian Refugee Council, have criticized the IDF's characterization of humanitarian zone as a safe haven, arguing that no area in the Gaza Strip is truly secure. The persistent bombardments and challenging boundaries of the zone, as well as evacuation orders that residents are often unsure how to interpret, reflect the volatility of the region and the difficulty in ensuring civilian safety. This situation also exposes the broader issue of accountability in military operations. The IDF's targeting of Hamas fighters in civilian areas raises serious questions about the compliance with international humanitarian law, particularly concerning the use of human shields and the disproportionate impact on non-combatants. While Israel insists on its efforts to minimize civilian harm, the BBC's findings show that the challenges of verifying these claims amidst a conflict with limited access for independent reporters. Next up, we turn to Israel's northern neighbor Lebanon, where the US-backed army chief has been elected to the nation's president. According to the CNN, the election of Joseph Aoun as Lebanon's new president represents a significant moment in the country's ongoing political crisis, underscoring the deepening influence of external actors such as the US and Saudi Arabia in Lebanon's internal affairs. Aoun's ascent to the presidency ends a prolonged political vacuum, which saw Lebanon without a head of state for over a year after the departure of Michel Aoun, a president supported by Hezbollah. This election reflects the enduring tension between Lebanon's pro-Western and pro-Iranian factions, exacerbating the sectarian divides, a hallmark of Lebanon's confessional political system. Joseph Aoun's election was heavily influenced by the US and Saudi efforts to rally support, marking a shift away from Iran-backed Hezbollah dominance. The promise to monopolize weapons under the state's authority made by Aoun in his acceptance speech signals a direct challenge to Hezbollah's military influence. Hezbollah, a powerful player not only in Lebanon but also across the region, is increasingly facing external and internal pressures to disarm. The recent Israeli-Lebanese conflict, which dealt a blow to Hezbollah's military strength, has reinvigorated debates over its role in the Lebanese defense strategies. The new president's call for a Lebanese defensive strategy that excludes Hezbollah is highly provocative, potentially igniting tensions between the group and the Lebanese state. However, Aoun's pledge to address Lebanon's multi-faced crisis, including the economic meltdown and political paralysis, will be a challenging task. Lebanon's economic situation remains dire, with many questions whether a president with close ties to the West can navigate the delicate balance of power in a deeply divided country. His presidency may mark the beginning of a new phase in Lebanon's political life, but it also risks deepening divisions and alienating Hezbollah's supporters, who still wield considerable influence. Ultimately, Joseph Aoun's presidency is an attempt to reshape Lebanon's geopolitical stance in line with Western interests, but its success will depend on his ability to balance internal tensions, uphold national sovereignty, and address the dire economic realities facing the Lebanese people. Finally, our focus lands in the Danish capital of Copenhagen, where Al Jazeera interviewed the prominent Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, who highlights a critical, controversial perspective on Zionism and its evolution into what he terms Neo-Zionism. According to Pappé, the current phase of Zionism represents an extreme, ruthless attempt to fulfill the original Zionist vision of 1948, taking full control of historical Palestine and evicting as many Palestinians as possible. This, he argues, marks the final stage of the Zionist movement, with its ambition for territorial expansion and regional dominance even beyond historical Palestine. Pappé's framing of the situation within the broader context of settler colonialism challenges prevailing narratives and calls for a broader international response. Pappé's critique of Europe's stance, especially its silence on the ongoing violence in Gaza, aligns with his broader skepticism of Western powers in addressing global injustices. His view that Europe's complicity stems from a mix of historical amnesia, economic interests, and geopolitical alliances that reflects a critical interpretation of the role Western states play in the perpetuation of the conflict. Pappé is equally critical of the US, especially under the leadership of populists like Donald Trump, arguing that the alignment with Israeli policies only strengthens Zionist goals. However, Pappé offers some hope, suggesting that the growing global alliance of movements against injustices, despite its challenges, may eventually dismantle the structures supporting Zionism. This optimism contrasts with his grim assessment of the current political climate, where populist figures and rising fascist tendencies in Europe and the US support Israel's expansionist policies. Pappé's statements resonate with many who view Zionism as a continuation of colonial practices that threaten regional stability. His call for the decolonization of Palestine and the broader Arab world is a significant part of the ongoing discourse around Middle Eastern liberation movements. Pappé's insights offer an uncomfortable but necessary reflection on the evolving dynamics of power and resistance in the region. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Middle East Today with Neil Drow. We've covered a range of critical issues shaping the region, from the troubling contradictions of Israel's so-called humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip, to Lebanon's new presidential election and geopolitical shifts it signals, to the thought-provoking insights of Ilan Pappé on Zionism's evolution and its implications for the Middle East. As we continue to navigate these complex issues, it's clear that the region is at a pivotal crossroads, where military actions, political maneuvering, and shifting alliances are all inextricably linked. These developments are not just about the Middle East, they have global implications that will affect us all. Thank you for tuning in today. Be sure to join us next time as we continue to explore the evolving dynamics of the Middle East and beyond. Until then, I'm Neil Drow, and this has been Middle East Today with Neil Drow.